Hello, everybody. What we're going to do today is talk through some direct link stuff. I recently learned that our book is Creative Commons licensed, and all you have to do is attribute them. And that's Larry Peterson and Bruce Davey. And we're using the book Computer Networks and System Approach. And in specific today, we're going to kind of walk through a little pieces of sections 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4, trying to keep things succinct and tight. So let's start in 2.2. And in specific, we're talking about direct links between two machines and kind of trying to expand on exactly how some of that happens. And right here, you see I've got up my tablet, which is being pushed through Discord here and shared on the screen. And I have the book on the right. So when you have two kind of machines or nodes connected to each other, the main thing that we need to talk about here in encoding is basically how do I send information between them? And so we're going to talk about some of those simple basics and how we make that happen, and kind of walk through that. And the fundamental basic level is something called an NRZI encoding stream. NRZI stands for not return to zero. And the basic idea is that as you're transmitting things, and this might be a little small, and I usually like to draw this at the same time, but as you're transmitting things, you don't return the power level to zero. So usually what we're doing is we're transmitting these voltages. And so say it's 5 volts. We would transmit 5 volts for a 1. And then if the next bit is a 1, we just keep transmitting 5 volts until we want to send a 0, and then we drop it down to 0 volts. So we're not returning to 0, and instead we're just transmitting the voltage that we need. It is up to the machine on the other side to know where these dashed lines need to go to count the number of ones. And that's basically our issue. Now, part of the problem is that these actual voltages might move around a little bit. And so what we'll do is we'll average kind of the signals that we see for a 1 and a 0. We'll kind of keep this moving weighted average. And one of the problems that exists is if you get too many ones in a row, that average is going to creep up high. And I kind of want to draw something a little silly here, but if you do that, then what you'll see is as you keep too many ones up here, right? And this is our bits, and we're going to keep these kind of small. What you'll see is happening to your average. You expect your average to kind of sit in the middle, but it's going to creep up here, right? And part of the problem is that these signals aren't completely clean, and so the actual transmitted data, instead of being this yellow line, might be a little noisy, right? And what might end up happening, and if you zoom in a little bit, right, like we're gonna zoom in here, what you might see happening is that this baseline creeps up. And if it creeps up too much, then some of these points here, as we zoom in again, some of these points here are gonna look like they should be zeros. Is this a 0? And that's the point of baseline creep. Now, this can happen if you get too many ones in a row, or if you get too many zeros in a row. And so it is something to look out for. It's something to be careful of. And it is a problem with NRZ that kind of creeps in. And so what do we do to fix that? Well, the first thing that you can do to fix that is you can introduce a scheme called NRZI. And the idea behind NRZI is that instead of transmitting a high voltage when you see a 1, then what you do is you switch voltages when you see a 1. So in this case, what you see happening with the NRZ method is it's low for 0, high for 1, low for 0, high for 1, right? But instead, for NRZI, what you do is you transmit low for 0, you keep the same voltage for 0, and when you see a 1, you flip from low to high. You just flip from wherever you were to wherever you want to be. So then I'm up here, and that flip means that there's a 1 there. And since I'm a 0, I'm just going to keep the voltage high. But this is supposed to be a 1, so I'm going to flip the voltage back down. So 1's flip the voltage, 0 hold it steady. And NRZI is neat because if you have a long string of 1s like we do here, right? Then instead of this creep happening, then this is going to translate that long string of 1s into a long string of up and downs. Okay, so it prevents this sort of creep from happening. Now, unfortunately, NRZI does not fix the situation in which you have a very, very long stream. A very, very long stream of zeros here. Okay, NRZI doesn't fix this. The baseline average could still creep down towards 0 and become a problem. 0 is sometimes less of a problem electrically. It kind of depends on exactly what technology you're talking about here. Um, and long streams of zeros do occur in data, and sometimes those are compressed, and so that doesn't happen as much. But this is still an issue that NRZI does not tackle. And so we want to do something else. We want to do something different. And there are a couple of different things that we can do. One of the things that we can do is, let's see, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. One of the things that we can do is that we can kind of force, ourselves not to transmit too many zeros in a row to make sure that our baseline is good. And so what we do is we take every group of 4 bits that we want to transmit to the other person, and we actually transmit 5 bits instead. And by transmitting 5 bits instead of 4 bits, what we're going to do is add an extra bit that that basically ensures the fact that we don't have too many zeros in a row. And so in this 4-bit, 5-bit encoding, there are some rules where you can't start with a certain number of zeros and you can't end with a certain number of zeros. And that makes sure that you're always switching up and down at least some. And so we kind of force more ones into these 5-bit codes than we would otherwise see to kind of force that voltage switch back and forth. And that's the 4-bit to 5-bit encoding. So we do lose a little bit of like raw transmission power here because, normally if you were to send, say, 20 bits, and let me switch over to the tablet here. Can I make this bigger? I don't think I can. All right. Well, normally if you were to send 20 bits, so 5 groups of 4, then you would just send it with NRZ, right? And it would be fine. Or NRZI, that's fine. Either one. But in this situation where you're using this 4-bit to 5-bit encoding, suddenly you transmit the same amount of information, but these 4 bits over here, like you would end up having to transmit those as a 5th bit. So you kind of lose, a little bit of your transmission rate. This is transmitting at like 80%. 80% of your data is real data, and the other 20% is kind of this 5-bit encoding. So you lose a little bit of information there. The last, I guess, and an interesting thing that we'll talk about is Manchester encoding. Manchester encoding is pretty cool in the sense that like it's always going to flip back and forth quite a bit. The problem with Manchester encoding is that it requires you to do that more often than bits would. So if you're doing it at like the maximum rate that your pipe can allow, then basically Manchester encoding is going to transmit half of the bit rate that you would otherwise get. But it is really, really cool in the sense that it solves this problem completely. Okay, so it does an explicit job of merging the clock directly to the signal, to making sure that that the data is always moving back and forth. Okay, so how does that work? The way it works is, if I'm supposed to be transmitting a 0, then I always do that as a low to high transmission. Okay, so if you can imagine, let's say this is our signal here. If I'm transmitting a 0, then I always do that as a low to high transmission. You can think of it like these kind of S's here. Oh, can you see it? There we go. Okay, you can see them as these S's. Now, if I'm transmitting a 1, then I always do that as a high to low transmission. Okay, so you can see these as like the 2s, right? They kind of look like little 2s. And so in a situation like this, it kind of looks the same, but it's important to note kind of where the clock is in this situation, like what's measuring, what's measuring, that's half clock, sorry. What's measuring when things are happening. Now, if you have a string of zeros like this, since zeros are low to high transitions, each of these zeros that you're trying to transmit has to be a low to high transition, right? And so what you get is this forced situation where you see this low to high transition. And since zeros are encoded as low to high, and ones are encoded as high to low, right? Since that's the case, you're always going to get like way more movement here. Now, again, the catch is that you have to do this kind of with the speed of the clock, and so it kind of halves your bit rate. But you've got no more drifting problems if you use this. Okay, our video is at about 10 minutes. I think that's probably good for encoding. Next thing, what we're going to do is talk about how this looks like in framing, and we'll do that in a separate video. All right, thanks for watching. See y'all next time.